The air in this place is the same as it ever was. Cool, dry, recycled 1,000 times through filters that scrub away any semblance of the world above. It smells of ozone, chilled metal, and a faint, ever-present undertone of sweat. That's the human element, the one variable this billion-dollar fortress was never designed to fully eliminate. I've been down here for, it's hard to say. The chronometers on the wall display the date and time in crisp, unwavering digits, but they've become meaningless. Time is no longer measured in days or hours. It's measured in decay rates, in dwindling supply inventories, in the lengthening silence from the other bunkers. I am Commander Elias Vance. My command is the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, or what's left of it. Once, this was the beating heart of NORAD, a nerve center buried under 2,000 feet of solid granite, designed to withstand a direct hit from a Soviet ICBM. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. The thing we built to survive the end of the world worked. It's just that the end of the world wasn't what we thought it would be. It wasn't a flash of light and a wall of fire. It was a whisper, a genetically engineered flu, something they called the Gray Shiver. It didn't come from a lab leak or a bioweapon attack, at least not as far as we know. It just emerged. And it burned through the global population with a speed and efficiency that made a mockery of our borders, our armies, our politics. One month, it was a news story from a distant continent. The next, it was your neighbor coughing blood into their hands on their front lawn. We were sealed in when the national emergency was declared. 574 souls, military personnel, scientists, engineers, and a handful of civilian officials who were deemed essential. The great steel doors, 25 tons each, hissed shut, and we became a time capsule, a seed pod buried in the earth, waiting for the storm to pass. For the first few weeks, we were busy. The world was still talking. We monitored comms, coordinated with what was left of the government, ran simulations, held briefings. The screens in the command center were a mosaic of global chaos. Then, one by one, the screens winked out. The chatter turned to pleas. The pleas turned to static, and the static eventually faded into nothing. Now the command center is my church and my tomb. Banks of monitors, most of them dark. A few still pull data from automated systems, seismic sensors, radiation counters, atmospheric monitors. They tell a story of a planet going quiet. The lights are always on. A sterile, shadowless fluorescence that bleaches the color from your skin. The only sound is the hum of the servers and the faint, rhythmic beep of the Geiger counter. A sound that has become the heartbeat of this dead place. My XO, Major Sarah Connors, sits at her station a few feet away. Her red hair is tied back in a severe bun that's starting to fray. She's looking at a logistics report, her face a mask of professional calm. But I can see the tremor in her hand as she brings her coffee mug to her lips. The coffee is a synthetic sludge now, made from our last reserves of powder. We don't talk about the good coffee anymore. We are the ghost in the machine, the brain of a body that has long since rotted away. We still go through the motions. We still file reports that no one will ever read. We still stand watch, because the alternative is to admit that we are no longer commanders of anything. We are just caretakers of a magnificent, empty tomb, waiting for our own time to run out. The worst part isn't the silence. It's the ghosts. I'll be looking at a bank of dead monitors and I'll see my daughter's face. Lily. She was 8. She had a laugh that could fill a house. She and her mother were in Bethesda when the quarantine zones fell. The last communication was a broken video call, her mother's face pale, begging me to do something. Anything, while Lily cried in the background. Then the line went dead. That was 7 months ago. I don't know if they are alive. The statistical part of my brain, the part that was trained to assess probabilities and casualties, tells me they are not. The father in me keeps that video call locked in a box in my mind, and I never, ever open it. Down here, we are all haunted. Every person at every console carries that same hollow look. We are the survivors, and our punishment is to remember the world that was, while we slowly suffocate in the world that is. We are the command structure of a nation that has ceased to exist. Our authority is a fiction we maintain to keep from tearing each other apart. And today that fiction is about to be tested in a way I could never have imagined. It was Specialist Davis who saw it first. Davis is our signals intelligence man, a kid from Iowa who could probably hear a pin drop in a hurricane. His domain is a nest of speakers and spectral analyzers, listening for any whisper in the void. Most of his shift is spent listening to the cosmic background radiation of a dead Earth, a constant, soft hiss that is the audio equivalent of static on a dead TV channel. I was going over the latest agricultural report, a depressing document detailing the slow failure of the hydroponics, Bay's fungal growth, when Davis's voice cut through the hum of the command center. It wasn't loud, but the sharp questioning tone in it snapped everyone to attention. Command, I'm getting something. It was the kind of sentence that in the old world would have been routine. Down here it was seismic. Connors and I were at his station in 3 long strides. The other dozen personnel in the room had stopped what they were doing. Their faces turned towards us, a mixture of hope and dread. What is it, Davis? My voice was tighter than I intended. It's a carrier wave. Very weak. Modulation is messy, almost chaotic. He was fine-tuning dials, his fingers moving with a delicate precision. It's on the emergency military band. The one reserved for strategic forces, Connors finished, her voice a whisper. He nodded, and with a final adjustment he fed the signal to the overhead speakers. What came out wasn't a voice. It was a guttural, wet snarling, punctuated by sharp, cracking sounds. Underneath it was a low, rhythmic moaning like an animal in pain. There were no words, just this visceral, awful noise. It went on for about 10 seconds before dissolving back into a wash of static and what sounded like scratching. The silence that followed in the command center was heavier than the granite above us. You could feel the collective hope, so briefly ignited, shrivel and die. It was replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Where is it coming from? I asked, my training forcing my voice back to a semblance of calm. Davis was already working, cross-referencing the signal's faint triangulation data with our satellite uplink. Our satellite network was a skeleton. Most of the birds were dead or drifting, but a few key military satellites were still in geostationary orbit, their solar panels feeding dwindling batteries. It's originating from the eastern seaboard, sir. The signal strength and the angle. I can't get a precise fix, but it's consistent with a location in or around Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., the heart of the old machine. The place where the final fractured orders had come from before the silence fell. Could it be automated? A damaged repeater? Connors asked, ever the pragmatist. Davis shook his head. The modulation is all wrong for an automated beacon. This is biological. Something is keying the mic. Something. The word hung in the air. We all knew what the gray shiver did in its final stages. The high fever, the hemorrhaging, the neurological degradation. The official reports, before they stopped coming, described behavioral changes, extreme aggression, a loss of higher cognitive function. We'd sealed ourselves in before we saw it firsthand. We had only the clinical, terrifying words in a report to go on. Get me visual, I said. Task the keyhole satellite. Priority override. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of that awful, snarl-ridden transmission cycling twice more. 20 minutes of standing in that brightly lit room, feeling the walls close in. Every person in the room was thinking the same thing. Was someone alive out there? Or was this the confirmation of our worst fears? The main viewing screen, usually dark, flickered to life. It showed a grainy black and white image from a high-orbit surveillance satellite. It was daytime on the East Coast. We were looking down at the corpse of a city. The Potomac River was a sluggish gray ribbon. Buildings stood, but many were scorched shells. Streets were clogged with the rusting hulks of abandoned vehicles. Zoom in on the coordinates of the signal source, Connors ordered. The image shifted, swimming dizzyingly before resolving. We were looking at the National Mall. The Washington Monument stood, a pale finger against the dead grass. And there, around it, was movement. It wasn't the movement of people. It was a swarm, a seething, chaotic mass of figures shambling and stumbling through the streets. From this height, they were just ants, but the satellite's resolution was good enough to show the details when we zoomed in further. They were people, or what was left of them. Clothes in rags, movements jerky and uncoordinated. The resolution wasn't high enough to see their faces, but you could see the way they moved, pressing against each other, mindless and relentless. And they were everywhere. Not just on the mall. They filled the streets. They crowded around the buildings. They were a human tide that had inundated the capital. My God, someone whispered behind me. Then we saw the source of the transmission. A military-grade communications truck, its antenna still extended, was parked near the reflecting pool. It was surrounded by the swarm. The hatch on the back was open. And these things were crawling over it, inside it. The guttural sounds we were hearing were coming from inside that truck. One of them must have fallen onto the console, was thrashing against it, keying the microphone over and over. There were no survivors. There was no command structure. There was only this, a plague of madness. The capital of the United States was a nest, a hive for whatever the gray shiver had turned people into. I looked at the screen, at the mindless, teeming horror that had replaced the city I once knew. I thought of the monuments, the halls of power, now just stone and metal perches for these creatures, and I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was an existential threat. If this was in D.C., it was everywhere. This was the new face of our world. And in that moment, the first terrible, unthinkable thought entered my mind, slithering up from the deepest, darkest part of my command responsibility. This cannot be allowed to spread. The silence in the command center after we killed the feed was absolute. The visual of that swarming, infested city was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The guttural snarls from the speakers had stopped, but they echoed in the new quiet, a psychic poison. I could see the same horror reflected on every face. Connors looked pale, her professional composure cracked. Davis had his head in his hands. "Seal the recording," I said, my voice rough. "Classify it level Sigma. No one outside this room sees it without my direct authorization." It was a pointless order. Who was left to classify things for? But the ritual of command was all we had left. I retreated to my small, Spartan office off the main floor. The door hissed shut, muting the hum of the command center. I stood before the large digital map of the United States that dominated one wall. Most of it was dark, indicating no communication, no power. A few tiny green dots represented the other bunkers we knew of. Site R, Raven Rock, a few hardened missile silos in the Midwest. Most had gone silent weeks or months ago. Their final transmissions were often fragmented, desperate. One, from a silo in North Dakota, was just a screaming man repeating, "They're in the vents," before cutting off. I placed my hands on the cool surface of the map, right over the smudge of light that was Washington, D.C., my city. I'd walked those streets. I'd taken Lily to see the museums. We'd had a picnic on the mall. Now it was a charnel house, a breeding ground for a new kind of predator. The logical part of my brain, the part that had been trained at Annapolis and honed in 100 war games, began to run the numbers. It was a cold, brutal calculus. Assumption 1. The entities in D.C. are host to a virulent, transformative pathogen. Assumption 2. They exhibit swarm behavior, are highly mobile, and are not constrained by the needs of a sane human population. Assumption 3. Their numbers are in the hundreds of thousands, concentrated in a dense urban environment. The conclusion was inescapable. Left unchecked, that swarm would inevitably disperse. They would follow river valleys, migrate along highways. They would consume any remaining resources, and in doing so, they would spread the contagion. We had seen no evidence of agriculture, of tool use, of anything beyond a mindless, destructive consumption. They were a biological wildfire, and we were sitting on the last, best fire break. The United States maintained a triad of nuclear deterrence: bombers, submarines, and land-based missiles. The bombers were gone, their runways silent. The submarines were... who knew? We hadn't heard from one in over a year. They were either at the bottom of the ocean or sailing on, captained by ghosts. But the land-based missiles, The Minuteman IIIs in their hardened silos, they were still there. Their systems were designed for autonomy. They could receive a launch order from us, from this very room. The codes, the authentication sequences, they were in the safe behind my desk. A physical briefcase, an anachronism known as the football, contained the final components. It had been brought down with the Secretary of Agriculture, the highest-ranking official, to make it here. He'd shot himself in his quarters 2 months ago. The football was now just a metal box taking up space in my vault. I had the authority. In the event of the decapitation of the civilian government, the chain of command devolved to surviving military commanders. By any rational measure, I was now the legal authority. The thought made me want to vomit. A soft chime sounded from my desk terminal. It was a request for a secure vid link from Site R. My heart hammered against my ribs. Another bunker. Another voice. I accepted. The screen flickered, and the face of General James Corrigan filled it. He looked 20 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken into deep, dark sockets. "Elias," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You saw it." It wasn't a question. Their systems would have picked up the same signal, likely tasked a satellite of their own. "I saw it, Jim. Our bio team analyzed the audio," Corrigan said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "The vocal patterns are inconsistent with any known human distress signal. They're consistent with rabid animal behavior. We also picked up faint thermal signatures from the city. Massive clusters. Their body temperatures are elevated, consistently around 103 degrees Fahrenheit. A perpetual fever. The engine of their madness. What are your thoughts?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Corrigan's eyes were hard. "My thoughts are that we are looking at the extinction-level event. This isn't a residual population, Elias. This is the adversary. This is what won. And if we do nothing, it will find its way here. To you, to me. It's just a matter of time." He leaned closer to the camera. "We have to consider a strategic strike. A cleansing fire." There it was. The words, spoken aloud, made it real. My mouth went dry. "A nuclear strike? Jim, we're talking about the capital. We're talking about a tumor," he snapped, his composure breaking. "A metastatic, aggressive tumor on the body of what's left of this country. Of this world. We have a duty, Elias. A duty to the future. To ensure that this—" He gestured wildly off-screen, presumably at his own satellite feed. "Is not the future. We scorch the earth. We burn it out. And what if there are survivors in there? People hiding? Immunes?" The question felt weak, even as I asked it. Corrigan's face was a mask of grim finality. "Then God have mercy on their souls. Because we cannot. The risk is too great. One infected person getting out, making it to a green zone. It would be over. You know I'm right. I did. That was the hell of it." The cold, brutal calculus added up, and the answer was a mushroom cloud. "I need to confer with my staff," I said, my voice hollow. "Confer all you want," Corrigan said. "But don't take too long. Our window is closing." Site R out, the screen went dark. I was alone again with the map and the ghost of my daughter's laugh. I was a commander. My job was to make decisions based on data, on strategy, on the preservation of my command and the greater good. The data was clear. The strategy was obvious. The greater good demanded the sacrifice of the capital. But the greater good is a cold companion in a dark room when you're about to murder a city for the second time. I was no longer just a caretaker of a tomb. I was about to become its chief executioner. I called a meeting of my senior staff in the conference room we called the Aquarium because of its soundproof glass walls. There were 5 of us. Myself, Major Connors, Dr. Eris Thorne, our chief medical officer, a virologist who had been working on the gray shiver until the samples degraded, Chief Warrant Officer Miller, our head of security, and Lieutenant Cruz, our communications officer. I had the satellite imagery and the audio recording played for them. I watched their faces as they processed it. Thorne looked fascinated and revolted, his scientific mind wrestling with the horror. Miller's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively resting on the sidearm he always wore. Cruz looked like she was going to be sick. Connors just stared at the table, her expression unreadable. Then I told them about Corrigan's call. I laid out the proposition, the calculus, as I had come to think of it. I used the sterile, clinical language of command. Neutralize the host population. Create a radiation barrier. Deny the area to the adversary. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd experienced. Dr. Thorne spoke first, steepling his fingers. From a purely epidemiological standpoint, General Corrigan is not wrong. Containing an outbreak of this magnitude and virulence, conventional methods are impossible. This is a pathogen that appears to have a 100% transmission rate and a 100% transformation rate. Burning the heart out is logical. Logical? Cruz burst out, her voice shaking. We're talking about nuking American soil. We're talking about vaporizing the Lincoln Memorial, the White House. We're talking about murdering anyone who might still be human in there. There are no humans left in that swarm, Lieutenant, Miller said, his voice a low growl. You saw what I saw. Those aren't people. They're animals. Worse than animals. They're a weapon. And my job is to neutralize threats to this command. And is the threat them? Or is the threat us becoming the kind of people who glass our own cities? Cruz shot back, her eyes blazing. Enough, Connors said, her voice quiet but slicing through the argument. She finally looked up from the table, her gaze meeting mine. The question isn't about what they are. The question is about what we are. What we become after we do this. She turned to the group. Let's say we proceed. We launch. What happens next? I answered. The scenario already mapped in my mind. We target ground bursts, 3 warheads, staggered triangulation to maximize the blast overlap and neutron flux. The goal is instantaneous sterilization of all biological material in the primary and secondary zones. The resulting firestorm and fallout will create a permanent exclusion zone, roughly a 50-mile radius that will be uninhabitable for decades. Decades, Cruz repeated, sinking back in her chair. And what about the other bunkers? Connors pressed. What about the possibility of other survivors out there, in the mountains, in the wilderness? What message does this send? That the last act of the United States government was to destroy its own capital? It sends the message that we are still here, Miller argued. That we have the will to do what is necessary to survive. That we will not go gently into that good night. This isn't going gently, Cruz cried. This is becoming the very monster we were meant to protect people from. The debate raged for an hour. The same points, circling each other, dressed in different words. The logical, tactical necessity versus the moral, soul-crushing cost. Thorne saw cells and vectors. Miller saw targets and threats. Cruz saw a crime against humanity. Connors saw the shadow it would cast over our souls. I listened to it all, but my mind was already made up. Corrigan was right. The window was closing. Every minute we spent debating was a minute that Swarm had to disperse, to propagate. The responsibility was mine, and mine alone. I was the commander. The buck stopped here in this buried room, at the end of the world. I held up a hand. The room fell silent. The decision is made, I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It was flat, devoid of all emotion, a perfect instrument of command. We will proceed with Operation Cinderfall. Major Connors, you will accompany me to the command center. Dr. Thorne, I want your best estimates on fallout patterns. Chief Miller, place the mountain on its highest alert condition. Lieutenant Cruz, you have the hardest job. You will record the execution order. For the log. The looks on their faces will haunt me until my dying day. Thorne looked grimly satisfied. Miller gave a sharp, determined nod. Cruz looked at me with a betrayal so profound it was like a physical blow. And Connors? Connors just looked sad, as if she were watching me sign my own death warrant. Back in the command center, the atmosphere was electric with a terrible, focused energy. The routine was gone, replaced by a grim purpose. Crews who had been going through the motions for months were now moving with sharp, precise movements. The warhead status boards, which had been dark for so long, were now lit up, showing green readiness across a dozen silo fields in Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana. I stood at the command podium, The football opened before me. Inside were the authentication cards, the code books. It felt like a relic from a dead religion. Connors stood beside me, her presence a silent anchor. "This is Commander Elias Vance, authorization Victor Victor Niner Zulu. I am initiating a Sigma priority command sequence. Authentication follows." My hands were steady as I read the codes from the card. My voice was calm as I recited the strings of letters and numbers. Inside I was screaming. I was thinking of Lily on the mall eating an ice cream cone. I was thinking of the cherry blossoms in the spring. I was thinking of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all the words we used to tell ourselves we were civilized. The system authenticated me. I was now the final arbiter of life and death for what lay in that target box on the screen. "Targeting data is locked," a technician called out. "Warheads 1 through 3. Minuteman Thrur. Silos Oscar 1. Mike 4. November 7. Yield set for maximum ground penetration. Flight time estimated at 28 minutes. A world away, in silos buried under the prairie, machinery that had been waiting for decades was humming to life. Fuel lines were pressurizing. Guidance systems were accepting their final destination. "Connors," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The final code." She handed me the last card. This was it. The final act. There would be no recall. No undo. This was the Rubicon, and I was about to burn the boats. I looked at the main screen. The satellite image of Washington, D.C. was displayed, innocent and silent from this height, betraying none of the horror it contained. I input the code. The system chimed, a soft, pleasant sound. "Launch order confirmed and transmitted," the technician said. "Birds are away." It was done. I had just ordered the nuclear annihilation of Washington, D.C. The 28 minutes between the launch order and the impact were the longest of my life. The command center was utterly silent, save for the hum of the machines and the soft, rhythmic beeping that tracked the missile's progress on the large screen. A sweeping arc extended from the silo fields towards the east coast, a digital representation of our wrath. There was no going back. No abort code. The system was designed for irrevocability. Once the birds were flying, they were flying until they reached their target, or were blown out of the sky by a defense system that no longer existed. I stood at the podium, my hands gripping the cool metal edge. I couldn't sit. I couldn't move. I was a statue of a commander, hollowed out and filled with lead. Connors stood beside me, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the tracking display. She hadn't said a word since the launch. My mind was a runaway train, hurtling through a tunnel of memory and dread. I thought about the men and women in those silos. Had they been alive to receive the order? Or were they ghosts, their desiccated fingers still on the buttons, following protocols written by ghosts for a nation of ghosts? I pictured the missiles themselves, sleek and white, rising from the earth on pillars of fire. They were the spears of a dead god, thrown in a fit of pique at a world that had failed him. I thought about the city. Not the swarm, not the infestation, but the city I remembered. Strolling through Georgetown with my wife Anna before Lily was born. The smell of coffee and old books, showing Lily the pandas at the National Zoo, her small hand in mine. The awe on her face when she first saw the Capitol building lit up against the night sky. "It's so big, Daddy." I had just signed the order to turn all of it to glass and ash. I had killed those memories as surely as I was about to kill the things that crawled through their ruins. What right did I have? The question echoed in the silent chamber of my soul. Who anointed me the judge of what was human enough to live? I had looked at a screen and seen a problem, and I had applied the final solution. Was that command? Or was it the ultimate failure of imagination? The failure to believe that anything but total destruction could suffice? I looked at the faces of my crew. They were pale, drawn. They knew the weight of what we had done. They were complicit. I had made them accomplices in this historic crime. Cruz's head was bowed, her shoulders shaking silently. Miller watched the screen with a fanatical intensity, as if willing the missiles to fly faster. Davis was just staring into space, his headphones off, his face a blank page. 10 minutes to impact, the tracking officer announced, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet. Connors finally stirred. She turned her head slightly towards me. "There's no coming back from this, Elias," she said, her voice so low only I could hear it. "For us. For the idea of us." I nodded. I knew. We had crossed a line. We had become the thing we were sealed in this mountain to protect the world from. We had unleashed the very power that had hovered as a threat over humanity for a century. We had made it real. 5 minutes. I thought of Corrigan. Was he watching in his own bunker? Was he feeling this same hollow triumph? This same soul sickness? Or was he celebrating? To him, this was a victory. A necessary surgical strike. I envied him his certainty. 1 minute. The screen switched to a live satellite feed of Washington, D.C. It was still the same grainy black and white image. The silent, swarming city. The monuments. The past. 30 seconds. My heart was a drumbeat against my ribs. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This was it. The moment of creation and destruction. The fire we had chosen to bring into the world. Impact in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The screen flared. A blinding whiteness that overwhelmed the sensors. For a moment, there was nothing but that pure, terrifying light. Then, as the sensors adjusted, we saw it. A roiling, incandescent dome of fire, swelling from the heart of the city, consuming everything in its path. The Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Capitol Dome. They didn't collapse. They sublimated, turning instantly from solid matter into vapor. The shockwave raced outwards, a visible ring of dust and debris flattening the city for miles. Then, the mushrooms. 3 of them climbing into the sky, first as slender pillars, then blooming into monstrous, towering black anvils, their heads glowing with the internal fire of the sun. They were beautiful. Horrifically, awfully beautiful. A new kind of monument. The Geiger counter in the command center, which had maintained its steady, soft beep, suddenly escalated into a frantic, continuous screech. Even from 1,000 miles away, buried under a mountain, it could sense the death we had unleashed. No one spoke. No one moved. We just watched the screens as the firestorms began to rage, as the city we had known was erased from the earth. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound. It was the silence of the grave, the silence of a species that had finally, truly lost its way. And I was the one who had led us here. The screens went dark an hour later. The satellite had passed over the horizon, and the radiation and EMP from the blasts had likely fried its delicate electronics. The last image we had was of a continent-sized stain of black smoke, with 3 angry red eyes glowing beneath it where the firestorms raged. The Geiger counter's frantic screech had settled back into a beep, but it was faster now, more urgent, a permanent reminder of the poison we had released into the world. I dismissed the crew. There was nothing left to command, nothing left to monitor. The great act was done. They filed out silently, not looking at me, not looking at each other. They were ghosts returning to their posts in a haunted house. I remained in the command center with Connors. The silence between us was a living thing. "Write up the after-action report," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "File it in the historical archive." "What do I write, Elias?" she asked, her tone not challenging but genuinely lost. "Do I write that we successfully neutralized a high-value target? That we preserved the integrity of this command? What is the narrative?" "The truth," I said, turning to look at her. The sterile light made her look ancient. "Write that Commander Elias Vance, in accordance with the doctrine of last resort, and acting on the belief that he was preventing a greater catastrophe, ordered the thermonuclear destruction of Washington, D.C. Write that he did so with the full knowledge that he was extinguishing the last light of the old world. Write that he carries the weight of that decision." She nodded slowly, then turned, and left me alone in the vast, humming room. I walked to the viewport, a massive slab of armored glass that looked out into a cavernous, empty hall, a monument to the scale of the project that was now meaningless. My reflection stared back at me. A man in a uniform, standing in a brightly lit room at the end of time. I am a commander. It is the core of my identity. It means being responsible for the lives in your care. It means making the hard choices so others don't have to. It means bearing the burden. But what is the command when there is no one left to command? What is the duty when the nation you swore to protect is dust? I had made the most consequential decision a military leader could make, and it meant nothing. It hadn't saved us. It had only defined our damnation. We were no longer the guardians of the future. We were the curators of the past, and we had just burned our greatest relic. I thought of Lily. I finally opened the box in my mind and let the memory of that last video call play. Her tear-streaked face, her mother's desperate voice. In a way, I had been trying to avenge them, to punish the world that took them from me, to impose order on the chaos that stole them. But my order was a fire that left only ashes. I will die down here. We all will. The supplies will run out, or the reactors will fail, or the silence will simply become too heavy to bear. And when the last of us is gone, there will be no record of what we did here. No one will ever read Connors's report. The mountain will keep its secrets, a fossilized dream buried under the earth. I gave the order to nuke DC. I did it with a clear mind and a heavy heart, believing it was necessary. But standing here, in the long, ashen dawn that follows, I understand the final, terrible truth. The gray shiver killed the body of the world. But I, with my codes and my authority and my cold calculus, have killed its soul. And that is a burden that not even 2,000 feet of granite can protect me from. It is the fire that will burn inside me long after the last light on this console winks out.